Hey everyone, welcome into Power Hour. It is a special edition as we are reacting live to the first set of CFP rankings. I'm Nicole Auerbach, and this is Batman. This is Chris Vannini. Happy Halloween, Chris.
Well, now everybody knows my secret identity. I can't believe you did that. Good to be here on
I'm
Halloween
sorry.
night.
Yeah, it was very fitting that our committee chair is named Boo, and we got our very first college football playoff rankings. As a reminder, you can subscribe, rate, and review us here on the Until Saturday feed. Chris and I will be with you every Tuesday night reacting live to the CFP rankings. And I know I'm not alone in this, but the first ones are the ones that I am most interested in. I will be. Are you just like teasing me? Where are you? You just have all this Halloween candy. You're just playing
I
around
brought
with
some
right now.
candy with
What's
me.
going
I
on?
brought some candy with me for the YouTube viewers. You can look at some candy.
Did you get trick or treaters yet tonight? By the way.
Not yet. It's not quite dark yet. I put a bowl out with a little thing to make sure nobody interrupts us while we're doing this, because this is the most important thing going on Halloween night.
This is, and I love how our commenters are already talking about Maction and giving us live play by play. You are our people. That is what we want. But we are going to get angry and analyze the first set of CFP rankings because this is the one where we actually learned quite a bit about how this year's committee thinks about things. We always wonder how much do they weigh resume? How much do they look at the eye test, strength of schedule, all of those types of metrics. So let's go from the top down. I'll read them just in case anyone missed it as you're listening to this. Number one, Ohio State. They've got two top 15 wins over Penn State and Notre Dame. Number two, Georgia. They are obviously number one in the AP poll. Michigan checks in at number three, and Florida State at number four. Just missing the cut, unbeaten Washington at number five. They have a head to head result over Oregon, who comes in at six, followed by Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss for the top 10. We will get into other things that jump out to us in these rankings, but the first question that I had coming into this was where was Georgia going to be ranked? I didn't think it was going to be number one. I didn't think it would be just like the AP poll. And Chris, it wasn't. They're at number two. Ohio State, on the strength of that resume and those two good wins, is number one. Are we good with that? What do you make of that message that the CFP committee just sent?
My first reaction is that I was right, because in my 133 rankings, I had almost the exact same top six. Only thing I had Florida State and Michigan flipped. Other than that, exact. Not surprised Ohio State's number one. Not surprised Georgia's number two. That's basically it. Not surprised Washington got left out of the top four after the last 2 weeks. So I think it's pretty good. I would flip Michigan and Florida State right now, but this stuff will sort itself out. There are a number of issues I have with some of the other parts of these rankings, but in terms of the top four, I think it all makes sense.
I agree. I actually feel like the top six entirely makes sense to me. I think that Oregon is better than Washington right now, and they have played
We
better
can
since
get into
those two
that.
teams met. Yeah, well, let's do that. Let's get into that because the show did as well. And I think we, going into that game against Washington, felt really good about the Ducks. I believe that they are the most complete team in the Pac 12. And if it weren't for a couple fourth down decisions, they win that game. We talk about them as one of the favorites to win a national championship. But I think people are coming around on this. To me, though, for them to check in at number six as the top one loss team with a potential rematch against Washington in their forecast, if both of these teams win out, they'll play for a Pac 12 championship. You've got Michigan and Ohio State, they're going to play each other. You got a team in front of you that you could avenge your only loss to. To me, that sets up perfectly for Oregon. Like, to me, that is a team that controls their own destiny because if they win out, what the committee just gave them the blueprint was if you win out, you're in.
Pretty much, because one of Michigan and Ohio State will have a second loss, or have a loss, at least one. And if it's Michigan, they won't have many other wins to jump back on like Ohio State does. You could, if you put Oregon and Washington together on a neutral field right now, I might take Oregon. Now, I think Washington should be ranked ahead, and they are ranked ahead. I went and watched, I saw that game up in Seattle, Oregon and Washington. Oregon was 2 yards away from winning that game. They've got a 3rd and 2, 4th and 3, can't convert it. Washington comes back to miss, to take the lead. Oregon misses a field goal. So, like, that game was decided by the absolute slimmest of margins. So if you're Oregon, I think you got to feel great about where you're at. Sitting number 6 right now. You've got a lot of big games coming up still. You've got, I think USC, you've got Oregon State, you've got a potential Pac-12 championship game. So I'm with you. I think if Oregon wins out, that they are probably going to get in.
Yeah, I think that's what this sets up clearly and really was what I expected coming into this. I do want to play you some sound from Boo Corrigan, the committee chair, because one of the other big questions coming into these rankings was, hey, does the committee care about the scouting and sign stealing investigation that Michigan is going under? An interesting wrinkle, by the way, is that Michigan's athletic director, Ward Manuel, is on the committee. So he leaves anytime they talk about Michigan. But we had wondered, okay, this is an off the field issue. This does not relate to the team that we're seeing on the field and the way that they are winning these games. They've already got things you can ding them for if you want to go for strength of schedule, their non-conference, their schedule. The meat is ahead. But would they care about the investigation that's been going on? Boo Corrigan was asked by Reese Davis on the selection committee show about just that. I think we have the sound, maybe.
I think we have the sound. If we
Okay.
don't,
Sorry, we're having an error on the production side of things. It's glitching out. Apologies. We'll go ahead and move on.
What he said
Okay,
was
all right.
it's an NCAA issue, not a CFP issue. So it doesn't sound like the CFP is going to take that into consideration, which is probably expected unless something else comes out at this point.
Yeah, I think that was the right decision. I kind of expected him to just say, like, we deal with the stuff that's on the field, right? I mean, and that's essentially what he said, that it wasn't a factor. And I think that makes a lot of sense because for as interesting as this investigation and everything around it and the scandal has been, and we'll get into this later in this show as we get into our On the Rock segment, we will talk about Connor Stallion and the latest with Central Michigan. But I think that this was the correct decision. You know, you are not investigating this. You could react if others make determinations or findings or handle things because we do know that they are not going to rank, say, James Madison because they're ineligible for the postseason. But until you have those determinations from other governing bodies, I think this is the correct call. We did get a comment, Chris. I want you to answer this because you had the order similar, but also reversed a little bit in terms of your 1 to 133. How do you think the committee necessarily handled its resume versus like strength of schedule, where they put Georgia, where they put Michigan, and then if you look at like a Florida State and Washington, like Michigan, I feel like was a little bit inconsistent if they're saying that resume matters and they used a lot of head-to-head results throughout the top 25. Did they treat Michigan fairly, or did they just treat them similarly to a lot of us, the eye test of just like, hey, this is an incredibly dominant team on both sides of the ball, even though they haven't played anybody?
Well, this is why I've had Michigan outside my top 3 almost all season once the games kind of got going. And Tom G asks, well, why do you have Michigan ahead of Washington? I think it almost made complete sense. Again, I would have flipped Florida State and Michigan simply because Florida State has the better wins. And yes, they almost lost to Boston College, but Boston College is a 5-3 team now. It's not the same team, we thought. So I would have flipped the two, and I think everything else plays out well. As for Washington and Michigan, Washington has a better win, much tougher strength of schedule. But I think the last 2 weeks change how people feel about Washington. You escaped Arizona State, thanks in part to a questionable pass interference that was not called. And you had a pick 6 to win that game. And then you barely hang on to beat, was it Stanford, I think, this weekend. So 2 close calls against 2 teams that are 2-6. So I could excuse one of those. I had Washington ahead of Michigan last week, but after 2 straight performances like that, I bumped Washington down to 5, moved Michigan up to 4 because Michigan hasn't struggled, hasn't come down to the end against bad teams. So again, I would have flipped Florida State and Michigan. I would have put Michigan at 4, Florida State at 3. But other than that, again, I had pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, and again, I've been looking at Georgia and Michigan pretty similarly because of their non-conference plays and the way that they have performed and the consistency that we've seen from Michigan. But, you do see some of the metrics being a little bit different and favoring Georgia. So I understand where the committee came in putting them above the Wolverines. I do think Florida State could have had a case for 2 or 3 instead of 4. But I think if you're the Seminoles, you feel good about your path too, because I think that Florida State has the clearest path. They are the last unbeaten in the ACC. They've played their hardest games already. And if they just went out, they're for sure in. They're already in right now. The committee would have put them in at number 4. So they're in a good boat, in a good spot as well. Chris, let's look at the back end of the top 25, because one of the most interesting things that we track, especially you as our group of 5 expert, is who is in best position to get that New Year's 6th spot. This was interesting. The AP poll has Air Force as the highest ranked group of 5 team, ahead of Tulane. And then you have Liberty also there in the mix because JMU is ineligible. This is what the committee has. They have Tulane checking in at number 24 and Air Force at number 25. Obviously, neck and neck, these teams are right there. But Chris, does this make sense to you? Do you think that this means it's Tulane's spot to lose here as we get into the stretch run of the season?
I was surprised by that, honestly, just because Air Force is an undefeated team. It doesn't have a great strength of schedule. I think it's like 115th, but Tulane's is like 93rd or 98th or something like that. The difference being Tulane played Ole Miss, who's in the top 10, and Air Force hasn't played anybody like that. And Tulane played that game pretty close for 3+ quarters with its backup quarterback. I think Tulane is the best team in the group of 5. I top to bottom as a team, but I have Air Force ahead of them partly because they're undefeated, because they've largely been just kind of destroying all the teams that they've played. So games still to come. Tulane still has to play UTSA and the championship game, which could be against UTSA, SMU, Memphis. So you've got at least 2, tough games still on the schedule. Air Force, they've got Army this week. They've got a Mountain West championship game. They could play Fresno State, who only has 1 loss. So both of them have an opportunity for big wins, but I think Tulane has a more opportunity. So I don't know. I always thought, hey, if Air Force goes undefeated, they're going to get the spot over Tulane. These rankings make me question that, especially because of what both teams have left. At this point, I kind of think if Tulane wins out, they may end up getting the spot.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting subplot here for sure to see Tulane trying to get back to a New Year's Six bowl for the 2nd straight year. Air Force trying to be the first service academy team to do that. Okay, before we wrap things up with our biggest takeaways, Chris, I want to hear your thoughts on where the 1-loss teams are. We talked about this earlier about how well Oregon has been playing, how complete that team is, and the path ahead for them. They are the top 1-loss team coming in at number 6. Then it goes Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Penn State, Missouri, and on and on and on. But there was some interesting reaction, I thought, to the fact that Texas was ahead of Alabama and then ahead of Oklahoma because Oklahoma did beat Texas. You do run into some tough, transitive property here with certain teams that kind of go in a triangle there. Did you have an issue with the way that those 3 teams were sorted? Did that feel about right to you if you were to put Texas to play Alabama on a neutral site right now, or Alabama to play Oklahoma on a neutral site? Is this about how you see it?
No, I had it differently than the committee did. My philosophy is always, if you got 2 teams that are pretty much in the same boat, if they played each other, head-to-head wins out. So I'm surprised.
Okay.
I'm not totally surprised Texas was ahead of Oklahoma because of what just happened last week. I am surprised that Missouri was ahead of LSU, for example. So those are 2 head-to-heads that they didn't go with. Ultimately, though, Texas, Oklahoma, it's going to play out. If they both win the rest of their games, they're going to meet in the Big 12 championship game, and the winner is going to possibly will probably get in the playoffs. So it will ultimately work itself out between the 2. So I'm not furious that Texas is ahead of Oklahoma. I just think philosophically, I don't like it. I would have Oklahoma ahead of Texas because Oklahoma beat Texas. What do you think?
I disagree because I think that you do need to separate the quality of the opponent that you lost to. And if we can pull Catherine B's comment up right now, because I think I agree with her. She says, I think Oklahoma almost losing to UCF, then choking to Kansas affects how I view them, at least. And I think that's totally true because the Kansas loss, although Kansas is ranked, they did check in the top 25 this week. That's different to me than losing to a team that is in that top 10, in that upper tier, upper echelon of teams that we're talking about.
Texas nearly lost to Houston. Two weeks ago. We just saw that. It was the same thing. They were literally inches away from getting close to tying the game.
Chris, I agree on all of these fronts. I think the Big 12 is going to be the league that is not going to make the playoff for both of these reasons. But I think that that is something that you can factor into. Just because you're one loss and the other team is one loss does not mean you have to be considered in the same exact band of teams. And I think that that is a fair take to have. You're going to run into issues if you try to have the entire thing go head to head. And we've seen this committee, not this year's committee, but in past committees. The one I always think back to is Michigan and Michigan State, where Michigan lost to Michigan State, that Kenneth Walker team. Michigan State was ahead of them for a couple of weeks, and then the committee said, you know what? No, we just kind of think that that result was a fluke. We are going to reverse this. Michigan is the better team. They are willing to do that. So again, they're going to be inconsistent on some of these principles. They're going to value resume in some places. They're going to value head to head in other places, and then other times they're just going to say, hey, I think that this is the better team, and you're going to run into that. So, Chris, before we give our winners and losers, I want to get just overall.
Real quick.
Ahead.
Before that, let me jump on the thing you just said. The Michigan State thing to me very much feels like Washington, Oregon right now.
Yes, 100%.
Washington inched out, but they didn't flip it. They have Washington ahead of Oregon now. Plus, I think the 2021 committee might have changed their mind if they knew that Michigan may have been stealing signs during that game. So credit to Kenneth Walker, who should have been in the Heisman Trophy ceremony for that year, considering what he was going up against from what we know at this point.
Chris, where did you go to college again?
I went to Michigan State, but that has nothing to do with it. That has nothing to do with what that was. I think everybody can agree with that.
I just wanted to get that in on the record. But the one thing I wanted to say about that is I think they are setting the table to do that. I think they're setting the table for if Washington continues to struggle, but eke out wins, that they will say that Oregon was basically even in that game and is a team that is playing better, that they trust more or believe is a more complete team. And I think that they will get there. I've been setting the stage for that in my top 10. I said, I will do it if we continue with a few more weeks of this. Okay, one last question, Chris. Is Ohio State the best team in the country?
No, I don't think so. Nobody on the ESPN committee seemed to think so. I don't think anybody in the country thinks so. But they've accomplished the most at this point. They've won on the road at Notre Dame. They've won on the road at Wisconsin, and they beat Penn State at home in a game that was not as close as the score. So to me, it was not. It was an easy number one. That doesn't mean I think they're the best team. If you were, again, 2 weeks ago or so, we put in our CFP picks. I had Michigan in. I think right now, if I was going to pick, I'd pick Michigan to beat Ohio State. But that's why these rankings are growing and evolving. This is not the final thing. These things usually play themselves out. There are very few situations. We've been doing this for 10 years. There are very few situations where the team at number 5 felt like they got screwed and should have been in. It almost always is a clean 4, and sometimes it's not even 4. So Ohio State number 1, it's fine. Mississippi State was the first ever number 1 in these rankings. They worked themselves out, so I wouldn't get too upset about any of this, but we're just here to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, I don't think Ohio State is the best team in the country, but I do appreciate when the committee does this and they make the resume matter, because coming into this ranking every single year, we are going off the AP poll, which is going off of who people thought was going to be the best in the preseason. And a lot of times you don't see them drop or really drastically move around these teams until people lose. And I think that this is always a helpful stage and a process where then the AP voters start thinking a little bit differently or reflecting the CFP rankings, because they realize, okay, well, just because Georgia was 1 in the preseason and they haven't lost doesn't mean that we have to keep them there. And this gets people thinking about the quality of the wins, who you played, who you're shaky against, and that is always a good thing to me. So I am totally fine with Ohio State being there in terms of resume, even though I don't think that they're the best team. And I also would pick Michigan to beat them if they were playing tomorrow. It is helpful when you have 2 great teams in the same conference who you know are going to play each other, because then ultimately this stuff doesn't really matter. And you know that as the Pac-12 teams, you know that as Florida State, you know that as the teams behind them in the rankings. So before we wrap up the top of our Power Hour episode, which I guess is a Power 5, even though we've had like a million different questions, and we're very loose with that term anyway. We're going to talk about winners and losers. So Chris, I will let you go first. Winners and losers from the first CFP ranking.
Oh, are we picking one of each?
Yeah, give me one of each.
Okay. Winner, Tulane, for what we have said here, which is they are the top-ranked Group of 5 team ahead of an undefeated Air Force. and they've still got at least 2 quality games coming up. So I think the path is there for Tulane to get the group of 5 New Year's 6 spot for the second year in a row if they win out. But I think Tulane's in a great spot from where they are in these first rankings. They are my winner. My loser, Washington, who I think has a case to be in the top 4. To have a win over Oregon and not be in the top 4 right now is a tough spot. And like we said, I think Oregon, they are positioning Oregon to potentially jump Washington, despite the head-to-head, if Washington struggles like it has the last 2 weeks. So I think Washington is a loser right now. Not to say they can't make the playoff, win out. The road's there in front of them. But in terms of where you are in the rankings right now, for Washington to be what they are and outside the top 4 is a tough break.
That's why Oregon is one of my big winners. I thought that they should be the top 1-loss team, and they are the top-ranked 1-loss team. And to me, that means you control your own destiny, because the committee is already showing that they don't have a ton of respect for Washington, because anyone with a win as high as the best win in the country, actually, because Ohio State's 2 wins are ranked below. FSU has that good win over LSU. Those are all teams ranked below the top 10. So for them to have the best win in the country and be unbeaten and be outside the top 4 means that Oregon is thought of very highly. They're using the head-to-head as the barrier right now. But if you're a Duck fan, you got to feel great about these first rankings. Your path is clear. You win out, you're in. And you're going to have a chance, probably, hopefully, to avenge that only loss. I hope that is the rematch we get in the Pac-12 championship games. The loser is Washington, and I'll say that they are the number 1 loser, but to just throw something else out there, how about Florida State? I think that they've got a case to be higher than where they are. They've got a case to be number 2, ahead of Georgia and Michigan, who haven't played anybody. They've got that really good win over LSU. The win at Clemson, it is depreciating in value, right, because Clemson keeps losing. But if you have people in the committee room who understand what that game was and how well Clemson played, that was the best game they've played all season, you should get a little bit more credit for that. And you've also just played, okay, fine, make a face, Chris, make a face. But my point is, you also just have a win that's better than anything Georgia and Michigan have right now. You have the committee twisting themselves in knots to say Michigan's got all these wins over teams better than 500.
Their best win is
like LSU.
Michigan's best win is Rutgers. It's Rutgers or Minnesota or Nebraska. Who we kidding here? Come on. I know you love Rutgers, but like their best win is nowhere close to anybody in the top 6. That's why I had Michigan outside the top 6 for a while. Michigan fans were very upset. They haven't beat anybody. Florida State has.
And again, so that's why, again, not that Florida State isn't a true loser, because they've got the easiest path here. You went out, you're in, your toughest games are behind you. But you have been disrespected a little bit. You could have been as high as 2. You certainly could have been 3 in these rankings. But otherwise, really interesting. Bowl eligible Rutgers. Thank you, Daniel. Can we get that up on the chat, please? Thank you. All right. They do deserve some respect. They've got a really tough final stretch of the season, so we need to celebrate Rutgers while we can. Definitely always thought that we were going to talk about the Scarlet Knights during a CFP reaction show. But that's what you get when Power Hour is doing these live shows, which we will do every Tuesday night coming off of the CFP rankings. By the way, hang tight if you're listening to this in the audio feed, because we're about to get into the rest of the news of the day here in Power Hour. Appreciate you listening and watching with us live, and we will see you again next Tuesday night on the Until Saturday YouTube page. For Chris Vannini, I mean Batman, I'm Nicole Auerbach. We'll